I do this sort of group exercise where I have everybody focus on one of those parts and notice it in their bodies, like one of those driven critics or, the workaholic parts. And then I'll say, how do you feel toward it? And with most groups, with non-business people, you'll get, I don't like it, it's burning me out, I want to change it, I want to get rid of it. These people say, I need it, I depend on it, I can't let it change. So yeah, that's what you're up against with a lot of these leaders. And so you have to then find the parts that feel so dependent on it and work with that. And then self can start to show these driven parts that there is an alternative and that you're not going to lose any edge. In fact, you're going to actually be much more effective and your company is going to be much more productive if you lead from this other place.
Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan, and it is truly an honor to introduce you to Dr. Richard Schwartz today. Dick Schwartz is the creator of Internal Family Systems, or IFS as it's known for short, a highly effective, evidence-based, widely used form of psychotherapy, particularly with trauma. It provides a non-pathologizing, optimistic, and empowering perspective, and a practical and effective set of techniques for working with individuals, couples, families, corporations, and classrooms. Dick began his career as a family therapist and as an academic at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is currently on the faculty of the Harvard Medical School and has published 5 books, including No Bad Parts, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with Internal Family Systems Model, and his IFS Institute offers training for professionals and the general public. Now, on a personal note, I've been trained in IFS online and have used the IFS framework with my executive coaching clients for many years now. And I had the special opportunity to get to meet Dick several weeks ago at a retreat that he and his wife, Jean Catanzaro, also a clinical psychologist, held in California. And it was a truly transformative experience. And if you ever get the chance to attend an IFS training event or a retreat or executive leadership retreat, I highly recommend that you give yourself that gift. So Dick, it is truly an honor. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, it's great to be back with you. And I loved having you at the retreat. It's really a treat. So great to be here, Vered.
Thank you, Dick. And I'm excited for our listeners to hear and see you today because there is such a benefit to utilizing the IFS approach and framework, both in terms of finding ease and joy and fulfillment and well-being personally, and also from a leadership perspective in terms of our leadership effectiveness, our ability to manage change, make better decisions, and of course, create better dynamics in our teams. And I know we'll get to that today. I want to start by asking, how did you start with all of this? What inspired you to develop the IFS model?
Wow. Okay. So some of it came from the sense of being worthless that it came out of my family. With my father was very hard on me because I'm the oldest of 6 boys, and he was a big medical researcher, administrator, and I was supposed to be a doctor, and I didn't have a head for that. So he was hard on me, and so I really wanted to find some way to prove him wrong about me. And then I started looking into psychology and spent time. He got me a job on the psych unit for adolescents at this Rush, it's now called Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's in Chicago. And I would get close to the kids there, and I'd be on the unit when the parents would come visit on weekends. And I could see that what the parents would tear into them, and then they were having basically psychoanalytic therapy, and that would never come up in this therapy session. So this was really before family therapy had become a big movement. But I thought there's something wrong with this picture. And so that drew me to family therapy when I heard about it. And then I became a kind of obnoxious family therapist who thought we'd found the Holy Grail and could change everything by just reorganizing these external systems, and decided to do that. Like you said, at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I had an outcome study going with bulimia back in the early 80s and found that we could reorganize the families just right. So just the way the book said to, and still my clients kept binging and purging. So out of frustration and curiosity, I began asking, why are you still doing this? And they started talking this strange language of parts. And I just got interested in what they were saying, because they were talking about these parts as if they weren't just little patterns of thought, but in fact had a lot of autonomy and could take over and do things they didn't want to do and fought with each other, and like they had relationships going on inside. And so at first I was scared because I thought, oh my God, maybe they're sicker than I thought. Maybe they have multiple personality disorder. Then I started listening inside myself, and oh my God, I've got them too. Some of mine are as extreme as theirs. And then I just got curious, and long story short, began asking about why they were doing what they were doing, and ultimately came to realize they weren't what they seemed, and that they were all trying to protect my client, but they were frozen in time back in traumas. So they thought the world was still as dangerous as it was when they took on this role. And they also carried what I'll call burdens, which are extreme beliefs and emotions that came into the part during the trauma about how safe the world is, and things like that. And as I got that, I started trying to get my clients to actually listen to them and have compassion for them, rather than try to get rid of them or fight with them, which is the way I started with clients. And as we would do that, these parts would share more of their secret histories of how they got forced into these roles. And over time, trial and error, I developed ways to actually help those parts transform. So that's my secret history of how I got into this. And it's now been 41 years I've been at this, and been loving most every moment, although there have been challenges because it's a different paradigm than traditional psychiatry has. And so I was attacked over and over in the early days, particularly.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think many of us intuitively sense that there are different parts of us, right? Like sometimes when I think, like, I'll give you an example. My youngest daughter a few days ago, completed high school and is going to be off to college soon. And so part of me was feeling really sad, of course, and that I'm going to miss her. And then a part of me, secretly was feeling a little bit kind of happy, right? Because my husband and I have a good relationship and I'm kind of excited, So there are different parts of us, that have different perspectives about the same thing, kind of like in a team. There are different members of a team that have different perspectives on a particular issue or event. And so tell us a little bit more about self, what that is.
Yeah. So as I was experimenting, and given my family therapy systems background, I tried to overlay some of what I'd been doing with families on this inner family. So I would try to get these polarized parts like you just described to talk to each other, or get my client to talk to one or the other to try and form a new kind of relationship with them. And as I was doing that, like maybe I'm having you try to get to know the part better that can't wait for your daughter to leave. As I would try to have you do that, maybe the part that felt ashamed about that would jump in. And so you would say, well, I don't like this part. I don't want to listen to it. And it reminded me of family sessions where I start out with having two people talk to each other who've been polarized, and it's going okay. And then suddenly one of them or a third party in the family jumps in and is doing the talking and is aligning with one against the other, and it goes south. And so I started thinking, maybe as I'm having you talk to this one, the part who doesn't like it is not has jumped in and is doing the talking. So I would ask clients, could you find that one and get it to just relax back for a few minutes so we can finish this conversation? And to my amazement, clients could do it. And when they did, they would shift into this wonderful state where the conversation would go very well, because suddenly out of the blue, they would feel calm and confident, but also very curious about the target part and also compassion for it. And when in that state, the part would reveal why it was doing what it did, and we could actually begin to help it change. And when I would do this with other clients, it was like the same person would pop out with those same C word qualities: calm, confident, curious, compassionate. And then four others would also be courageous relative to it, and uh, creative in how the person related to it, and would see it clearly before that they would see a distorted image of it and would want to connect or feel connected to it. So that's what we call the 8 C's of self or self leadership. And that's held up these 40 years as the person who's really in there at our core when these other parts open space. And yeah, the most amazing thing about IFS is that that self can't be damaged and is just beneath the surface of these parts, such that when they open space, it pops out and knows how to heal, knows how to relate in a healing way to your parts, but also to your husband and your relationships. And that's in everybody. And so a lot of the work is designed to help people in leadership learn about self and how to access self, and then help them begin to relate to their parts in this much more compassionate way.
Yeah. And I think that our ability to access that self energy, all of those 8C qualities that you mentioned, are so key in leadership. And a lot of people have heard about, the importance of having empathy, the importance of having emotional intelligence, and being attuned to how people may feel and how they themselves, feel in certain situations. And many people don't know what to do about that, right? So they know it's important, but sometimes they can't quite access that empathy because there's so much overwhelm and stress, or maybe they have had evidence that, in their perception, somebody is not doing their job, or, slowing the team down, or whatever that might be. So what can people do to connect with their own self energy so that they can really radiate that out, bring that into their teams and companies?
Well, a lot of the leaders I've worked with, the parts of them that got them to the position they're in aren't the most empathic, and they're not self-led, and so they are very driven and workaholic kinds of parts, or they're parts that are very critical on them, and so they're also critical on people around them. And I could go on, but so people who reach the top tend to be, there's a vast overgeneralization probably, but lots of them are driven by those kinds of parts. And those parts are good at getting you to these places, but they're not good when you have to lead a community or a company, because they tend to polarize or scare people. And so the first thing I do is help these leaders notice that and see that these parts are running them, and then begin to separate from these parts and actually get to know what they're afraid would happen if they didn't keep pushing and weren't so critical. And then there's a process by which we can actually heal the parts that drove them. So when I was telling my story, I talked about this sense of worthlessness that I had coming out of my family. And so as I felt that, these other parts came to take over that were determined to prove that I wasn't worthless, and did turn me into a bit of a workaholic for a period of time, and could be quite critical of anybody that challenged me. And that again got me through the whole, you know, storm of trying to bring this in the Department of Psychiatry.
Mm.
How many times I got attacked, and how these parts would protect me by not caring what people thought. But those weren't good qualities when I became the leader of a community. And so I was lucky to have some colleagues and students who confronted me and said, you know, if you're going to do this, you got to work with these parts. And so I did. And so now, to the degree to which I seem humble, but also an effective leader, and our community is huge now, it's because I worked with that. I worked with the part that felt so worthless, and then I worked with the parts that were trying to counter that and show everybody how great I was, and made me a bit of a narcissist, and made me also over-focus on bringing this. And, you know, I've still been repairing things with my daughters because they felt like IFS was the fourth sibling that was preferred over them. And so that's what I try to bring to leaders too, that there is a different way to lead, and you don't have to learn skills to do it. In fact, as long as you're dominated by these parts, those skills aren't going to get you anywhere. You really have to work with these parts and free them from the extreme roles they've been forced into, so that they don't dominate and they become kind of advisors and helpers, but they trust you, those 8 C's of you, to run things.
Thank you. And I do believe that the issue is the over significance. So let's say somebody who is driven or is a perfectionist or overly conservative and cautious, right? It's the over significance to it. It's a protective mechanism, of course, to keep us safe. Always. It's a very loving mechanism, which is why, you know, a lot of leaders, you know, they sometimes think of these parts of themselves that they may not like, as like sabotaging them or doing these things. And it always hurts my heart because I know that these sweet little parts are really just trying to help them. They're trying to protect them. And that's what we hear when we connect with those parts. So can you give the listeners, if they're not yet familiar with this concept of parts or IFS specifically, maybe some examples of what parts are, how, what kind of protectors there are, just to give this a little bit more context.
Yeah, so as I was learning from clients about their parts, and also listening inside myself, because I came to realize I've got them too at some point. Mm-hmm. As a systems guy coming from family therapy, I tried to make a map of this territory. And what I found was that we all have these, what other systems might call delightful inner children, that are these young, playful, loving, open, creative parts of us. And before they get hurt, we love to be with them, have them take over at times. But they're also the most sensitive parts of us. So when we do get hurt and traumatized or parenting poorly, we take in those parts in particular, because they're so sensitive, take in this sense of worthlessness, like I was talking about with myself, or the terror from some kind of trauma, or the emotional pain from some kind of betrayal or abandonment. And once they carry those burdens, we don't want anything to do with them, because we don't want to feel any of that anymore. And they have the power to overwhelm us. They're carrying all that, and they're suffering, so they want us to feel it. So we then sort of naturally try to lock them up in inner prisons or basements, and think we're just moving on, like our culture tells us to, from the trauma, not realizing that in doing that, we're locking away our most precious qualities simply because they got hurt or terrified. And so we call those the exiles in the system. And most of us have a bunch of exiles. This is a tough culture to grow up in. And when you have a bunch of exiles, you feel more delicate and the world seems more dangerous because so many things could trigger those parts. And if they get triggered, they break out of exile and they overwhelm you with their feelings and they pull you back into those scenes, make it hard to function. So to keep them contained and protected, a bunch of other parts become protectors and they're taken out of their naturally valuable roles into these extreme protective roles, some of whom are trying to protect you by managing your life so that nothing triggers your exiles. Maybe don't let anybody get close enough to do that, or maybe make you look good so you don't get rejected, or make you achieve, like I was saying, at a high level so you can counter the worthlessness. Or maybe make you take care of everybody so that they depend on you, but you don't let you take care of yourself. Or so these are all what I call manager roles that these parts are forced into, and there's a bunch of others. And most of us have a bunch of these managers running our lives. As I mentioned before, I had that achievement one doing that, and a couple others, and they don't let you feel what I was calling self earlier. They really don't trust self to lead. They really think they have to do it because they did have to do it at some younger age, and they're sort of stuck back there in those scenes, those times. So they're managing as best they can, but the world still has a way of triggering your exiles. And when that happens, it's a big emergency. So there's another set of parts who are kind of on standby, who then immediately go into action to take you away from those flames of raw emotion. And they'll do it whatever it takes to do that. Some of them have pretty extreme ways of doing that, of getting you higher than the flames, or dousing them with some substance, or distracting you until they burn themselves out. So we call those firefighters. And most all of us have a kind of hierarchy of firefighter activities. And if it gets too hot, whatever it takes, some of them are suicidal. But below the suicidal ones are addictive parts, or rageful parts, or dissociative parts. And so those firefighters are desperately just trying to keep you alive, and everybody vilifies those. And your managers don't like them either, because your managers are trying to keep you in control and please everybody, and the firefighters piss everybody off and take you out of control. So there's a polarization right there. So anyway, that's the map to the territory. It's pretty simple, really. It's exiles and then two kinds of protectors, managers and firefighters. That map's held up pretty well over these 40 years.
Yeah.
And, there's no self in what I described. So many people, self is what we call blended with these parts so that it's not able to actually lead. Yeah.
And this is such an important framework for people to know. Number one, because it really acknowledges all of the different parts of us, including the ones that may reach for the drink or for the whatever it is, substance, as you said, or that may yell at our spouse or at our children and do things that we regret or we feel ashamed about. Those parts of us were doing that out of love, out of protection, in the best way they know how. And so the best way to help them is really to soothe them, witness them, listen to them, love them, and then that behavior diminishes. And from an organizational perspective, this is really important as well, because parts show up when we're triggered, right? These protective parts show up. And sometimes we may overreact to something or do something again that we regret, as business leaders, as employees, and again, giving ourselves some grace and compassion, knowing that that was a decision that was made in that moment by a part. It wasn't who we really are, of course, our true self. It was some kind of a blending that was going on. And so when we're able to be curious and label the emotions, then those parts can give us the learnings, the positive resources that we need in order to expand and evolve and grow. So I see IFS very much as a personal and leadership development tool, in a sense, to help us to be able to show up as our best, make the best decisions that are not only advantageous for ourselves or our immediate teams, but really have more of an integral perspective. Because when we're in self, we're able to perceive things from kind of a peripheral type of perspective, right? We're able to see other people's thoughts and emotions, even if we may not agree with them. We can respect them. We can give those individuals in the context of a team, more airtime. We can really be much more compassionate and curious when we do our own inner work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As you're saying, just the idea that when I yelled at my employee, it wasn't me doing it. It was really just this protective part of me. That by itself is a big deal. Just to know it's just a part, and actually it's not bad either. It's protecting some other vulnerable part of me that got triggered by this person. And just knowing that, you can go to your employee and apologize, and also then follow up and go, we call it U-turn in your focus, and find that anger, and without any shaming of it, just get to know it and see what it is it's protecting, and then do a piece of healing with that, maybe with a therapist, maybe on your own. So that's a lot of what we're trying to bring, is this kind of depathologizing sense of who these parts of us are and that they aren't who we are, and non-shaming way of relating both internally and externally. And the same as your employee reacts in some extreme way, in your head you're not saying, oh, they're just a bad employee. You're thinking, oh, they've got a protector now. And you can kind of have x-ray vision. You can see past their protector to the vulnerability that's making that part overreact.
That's
And
right.
so you can relate to them with compassion, even if you have to, get them to stop doing what they're doing. You do it from a very different place than if one of your protectors reacts to theirs.
That's right. And I think that's the biggest mind shift of all. In this podcast, we talk a lot about mindsets, of course, these beliefs, and oftentimes these very extreme beliefs, right? That these burdens that are being carried, and that, we essentially operate out of until we release those burdens and can see the truth. And so one of the biggest mind shifts is very much, right, the title of this book, right? There are no bad parts. And that is true, as you said, for our team members, for our children, our other family members, right? People in the world who are doing bad things. There are no bad parts of them either. They are operating out of false narratives that are dictating extreme behaviors, maladaptive behaviors. And those parts, sometimes they are firefighter parts, right, who do horrific things, or other protective managers. They are doing the best that they can to protect. And so, one of the thoughts that came up right now, I'm going in a couple of weeks to visit a women's prison to do some work with the ladies. And I know that every single one of them, every single person who has done things that find themselves in a situation like that, is behaving out of some patterns that are, creating decisions in the moment. And it's easier to have empathy and to be curious when we realize that they're not evil people, and nor are those parts of them that did those things evil.
Yeah.
just confused, perplexed, right? Doing the best that they can. And when we're giving them the love, the curiosity, it really does heal. And I have to tell you that I have learned so many things over the years, Dick, so many different methodologies. And the IFS framework has given me kind of a home for all of them, which is really that the way um, to be with our inner world, um, to make more objective decisions in our life is to just pause and label and notice what these parts really need us to know, and to activate the heart as we do by being curious and loving and soothing them. And that's true for all of the different modalities, healing modalities. There is an aspect of bringing the self into the scene, into the picture, into the conversation. And that makes the biggest difference. And I think that one of the many gifts of IFS is that concept that you talked about earlier that you found from family therapy around asking any kind of parts that are polarized or that are, to step back, to give a little bit of space, because that has worked every single time, Dick, with clients, and it is truly transformational.
That's so great to hear, Erin. Uh, yeah, I didn't know that there were no bad parts. Initially, I was working with these bulimics, and their binging parts turned out to not be bad, and their critics were not so bad once we did the work with them. But what about parts that had molested little kids or raped women or murdered people? And it wasn't until, in order to test that, I consulted to a treatment center for sex offenders for about 3 years. And I worked with those people, and they would focus on the part that did the horrible thing. And it took a while to get them to be curious about it rather than hate it. But once I did, it would share its secret history of how when they were being abused as a child by some parent or something, this part was desperate to protect the child and said, who has power in this room? It's this guy doing this to me. I'm going to take in his energy to protect my person from him. And then it gets stuck with this impulse to hurt vulnerability and hurt kids and so on. So even those parts, that's when I started saying, okay, there are no bad parts. Yeah.
And one of the things that I hear, Dick, when doing this type of work with people or training groups of leaders, is that there's some concern that should they have more of that self energy, right? Be even more empathetic, compassionate, curious, and so on, that they might lose their edge, their drive, that thing that got them to succeed, as you said, that took them to this place, which, as we both know, is not sustainable. Physiologically, it's not sustainable. It's depleting their energy, it's impacting their health, but also it's not sustainable as they expand their influence, right? As you said, leading communities and so on. So what do you have to say for those individuals who are like, I'm not sure if I should go there?
No, I totally understand, because the times that I do this sort of group exercise where I have everybody focus on one of those parts and notice it in their bodies, like one of those driven critics or, the workaholic parts. And then I'll say, how do you feel toward it? And with most groups, non-business people, you'll get, I don't like it, it's burning me out, I want to change it, I want to get rid of it. These people say, I need it, I depend on it, I can't let it change. So yeah, that's what you're up against with a lot of these leaders. And so you have to then find the parts that feel so dependent on it and work with that. And then self can start to show these driven parts that there is an alternative and that you're not going to lose any edge. In fact, you're going to actually be much more effective, and your company is going to be much more productive if you lead from this other place. And it takes a while for these parts to trust that, because there's again, it's what did get you there. And so, it just takes some work. But one of the questions we'll often ask, and I hope you've been asking this of your clients, is ask this part how old it thinks you are.
Mm.
And in answering that question, most of the time it's a single digit. And just updating them that, yeah, when you were 7, you did need this part, but now you're whatever age and you don't need it now in the same role. And so it's safe for it to let you handle the company. And then the other thing is what we're calling self-leadership is contagious, so that as a leader accesses it, it just starts to permeate and it brings out the self in everybody in the company. And it creates a very different kind of field of energy in a company. The Samoans call that the va, and you can strengthen the va and you can weaken the va. And self strengthens it, and some of your protectors weaken it. So that's another benefit.
Absolutely. It impacts the culture, it impacts employee engagement. People feel safe, people feel loved, they feel cared for genuinely as soul to soul, right? Human being to human being beyond the numbers and the results. And they're much more likely to lean into change or discomfort, to be innovative because they're not afraid as much, right? So they're operating from their own self more so than their own reactive parts. I wonder if you may be willing to guide us through just a little mini exercise to give our listeners maybe a little bit of a taste of this work.
Be happy to, sure.
Thank you.
And your listeners are mainly coaches, or how would you say?
Entrepreneurs,
Okay, good.
leaders of organizations, and of course the board, leaders of their families, people who want to create positive, sustainable change in their lives and in the lives of others.
Fantastic. It's perfect. So yeah, we I'll invite people, and again, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. But if you're interested, I'll invite you to get to know one of these protectors a little bit. It could be one of the driven parts we've been talking about, could be one of those critics. Most everybody has a critic. Uh, you know, as we've been talking, you may have been thinking about your own protectors. So I'm going to invite you to pick one that you just want to get to know better and maybe help start the process of convincing it doesn't have to dominate. So I'll give people a second to pick one. And as I said, if you can't think of one, then everybody's got a critic. So you can start there. And then once you have a part in mind, then focus on your experience of it, whatever that is. Could be a voice or a thought pattern or an impulse, motion. And then find that in your body or around your body. Because these parts kind of broadcast from certain places, which you can locate if you're curious. And then as you notice that part, I'm going to ask this kind of odd question. How do you feel toward it? In other words, you have a relationship with this part. As I said earlier, you might depend on it, fear losing the edge if you don't have it, but you might also hate it as you see what it's doing to your life, or fear it, or or depend on it. So just notice how you feel toward this protective part of you. And then, if possible, ask any parts that have an attitude toward it or afraid of it, or even the parts that depend on it, to give you the space in there to just get to know it, just to open your mind and get a bit curious about it, and just see if they're willing to do that for a second, not real long. And if they are willing, you'll notice a palpable shift in your energy in your body towards fairly pure curiosity and maybe even compassion for the part, which is when we know that you have the critical mass of self relative to it. And if that's not happening, it's just because some of these other parts are afraid to let you do this. So you could just spend the time asking about their fears. But if you do get at least curious about the target part, then go ahead and ask what it wants you to know about what it's trying to do for you, why it's working so hard. And don't think of the answer, just wait and see what comes from that place in your body. And then the follow-up question to that is, what's it afraid would happen if it didn't do this job inside of you? If it answered that one, then you learned about what it's trying to protect. And if that's true, then go ahead and let it know you appreciate that it's trying to protect you, even if it's misguided or it's not working. Let it know you see that its intention is to try and help you and keep you safe. And see how it reacts to your appreciation. Ask it if you could heal or change what it protects so this job wasn't so needed, what might it like to do instead inside of you? I'll repeat that. If you could heal or change what it's been protecting, is there something it would like to do if it was freed up? Then do ask it that how old does it think you are question. Again, don't think of the answer, just see what number comes. If it got your age wrong, then update it. Let it know how old you are, how you can handle more than you could back then. See how it reacts. Then the final question for this protector is, what kind of relationship does it want to have with you now that you know it better and differently? Yeah, how would it like you to relate to it? All that feels complete, then thank the part for whatever it let you know and thank the parts that gave you the space to get curious about it. And then begin to shift your focus back outside. So I could see you were doing it while I was leading you. Do you want to share what what you did?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dick. That was a wonderful exercise. And for me personally, I worked with that part that is feeling happy that, my children are officially now out of the house. And because there was immediate guilt, even after I said it, a part of me that I said it to, a part of me went, "Oh my God, the shame! You shouldn't say that, and you shouldn't feel that." And so I worked with that and asked those parts, to step back so I could be with that part that was feeling happy. And by the way, it thought I was 9, and it told me its job is to protect me so that I wouldn't feel the sadness of the loss.
Oh, wow.
Wouldn't
Okay.
feel the grief quite so much. And 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 also she was there, to tell me, because thankfully my husband and I have a good relationship. She's like, for 23 years you've, been raising children, and now it's like your time. You get to kind of get to do more things together and go out and and just kind of explore. It's like, so it was a very positive thing. And she's like, you can dance more and all these things that I don't think I've given myself as much permission to do, just in mom mode, when you got stuff to do. So it was just, I mean, I'm just so grateful to that part. And, let her know that I will work with the sadness, and it's okay to feel sad. It's okay for me to feel sad because I will miss having them in the house. And so that's okay too. I can hold both. Yeah.
And she believed you that she doesn't have to protect you from the grief?
Let me check in.
Yeah, I just asked.
Yeah, she's saying yeah because she saw already over the last few days that I was okay. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's great. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a great example.
Yeah.
Uh, and that last question, did she want you to keep a relationship going with her, or what did she want as you move forward?
Yeah, she said, I'm going to help you to dance more. My husband and I have been doing like yin yoga every night and all these kinds of things. She's like, I'm going to help you to, let go of work and all the stuff that you always think of that you need to do so that you could, just have a little more fun in life, just take it easy a little bit more because it's time.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great example. I really appreciate your sharing it.
Thank you for guiding us through that. And my sense is that those individuals that followed your instructions also got to connect with some parts of themselves and to hopefully appreciate the sacrifice that those parts are doing. I mean, 9-year-olds would rather be out playing, right? Or however old those little ones are. And here they are doing a service to us. So they deserve, I mean, they're truly little heroes. They deserve really a whole lot of appreciation and love and affection.
Totally agree. And it's important that they realize that they are that young and they don't need to run your system, that there is a you who can handle all that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, kind of as we kind of move toward completion here, what is one thing that you invite our listeners to do, perhaps daily, in order to bring more of that self energy and to soothe and acknowledge their parts?
Yeah, well, there are practices. There are meditations on, I guess, online. Sounds True has some of mine that people can do on a daily basis. It becomes a kind of life practice. So when I wake up in the morning, I'll just do a little inventory. How's everybody doing? What do you need? Uh, and sometimes I'll find a part that was triggered by something that happened the day before, and I'll say, okay, I'll set aside some time to actually get to know you better and work with you. So we're really just inviting people to do what we call a U-turn in their focus, because so many of our managers are focused in the outside world and trying to remember what we're supposed to do in the day, and they keep us away from these parts that need our attention. And also when somebody's doing something that bothers you, you don't think to go inside and find the parts that got triggered. You want to change that person.
Mhm.
This is a kind of reversal in your focus that that then allows that person to become what we call a tormentor, with a hyphen between the tor and the mentor. By triggering you, tormenting you, they're mentoring you on what you need to heal. So it's a different approach to life, really. And yeah, and the more you do that, the more your parts come to trust you as a leader internally, which then translates into your employees trusting you as a leader.
That's right. It's that law of correspondence, as above, so below. And, it really is a mirror, if you will, of what's going on in our inner family of parts. And, one of the things, that practice of a U-turn, that I sometimes share just because it was a fun acronym is play, kind of playing the game. So P is for just pause, go inward for a moment, label what are your parts saying, thinking, feeling, part of me this, or part of me that. And then the A is activating the heart, which is really just listening to them, loving them. We can do a technique to, experience even more compassion. And the Y is for yielding some of that over significance so that we can access the resource and the learning, the beautiful gift that those sweet parts have for us so that we could evolve and make better decisions and, of course, serve our planet in a more self-led way.
Yeah, that's part of the goal. There are basically four goals in IFS. The first is what we've talked about a lot, which is helping these parts transform into who they're designed to be and out of the extreme roles they've been in. The second goal is for them to trust self as a leader, because often they come not knowing about self or not trusting. You didn't protect the system when we were younger. Why should we trust you now? So helping them trust there is this self in there that can handle things. The third goal is to harmonize this group of parts so that they get to know each other differently and work together as a team rather than being polarized all the time. And then the fourth goal, which you're alluding to, is for you to become more self-led in the outside world. And when you do that, it has a big impact on not only your close relationships, but self has that C word, clarity, and you see injustice in the world, and then you have the courage to actually act to try and change that. And you might see it in your company, or you might, and your compassion might allow you to not make as much money and try to help your employees out more, things like that. So anyway, all this is direct translation into a different kind of leadership.
That's right. And a different kind of world.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about, raising that global consciousness, bringing more love into the field, which will help all of us.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dick. How can people learn even more about IFS and to bring even more of that into their life?
Well, our website has a bunch of resources on it, and it's ifs-institute.com. And yeah, there are lots of videos of me on YouTube and a lot of books that I've written you can find on the website. And if anybody's interested in donating, there's a foundation for self-leadership. It's not for profit that is doing a lot of supportive research and other things. So yeah, and I love our collaboration and look forward to more.
Thank you so much, Dick. With all my love, thank you and your team for doing all that you do.
Same here. Love back to you.
Hi, Game Changers. It's Vered. Thank you for tuning in to this special episode with Dr. Richard Schwartz about the internal family systems framework. I hope you loved it. I hope you enjoyed the meditation. I invite you to listen to it again and again to get to know your parts even better and so that you can experience even more acceptance of all the parts of yourself and really appreciate that they're all doing their best for you. So this is Kiwi, my little love bug, and we are sending you a whole lot of love. I invite you to also check out my podcast episode with Roland McCready from the Institute of Heart Math about the research on activating the power of the heart and what happens in your own body and in the field when you do that. Last but not least, if you haven't already, subscribe and download the Momentum Institute app. It is on the App Store. You'll have a free course there on mindset that I hope will be helpful to you. And I am sending you all my love. Mwah. Bye for now.